Welcome, everybody, and those attending virtually. Tonight, we have Madison and Kaitlyn with Kids in Motion Pediatric Therapy, and they're going to talk about bedtime success. And those of you that I think a lot of you guys are familiar faces, and so this is not a topic that we've talked about yet, is bedtime routines and stuff. And so I'm excited about this topic. And Kids in Motion were with us, I think, back in November, and they did a great training on bowel movements and things like that, and it was fabulous. And so we're excited to have them back. And just a reminder, if you haven't paid your dues with Region 7 for the year, the calendar year of 2025, those are due $20. You can pay them to Adam, our treasurer with the board, and those online, we can drop a link in there for you guys too. And yeah, I think we'll just get rolling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm Madison and this is Kaitlyn.
Hello.
And we're
Hello.
OTs at Kids in Motion. And like Leslie said, we're going to be presenting on building healthy sleep habits and sleep management. Okay. You want to be the clicker? Kaitlyn's going to be the clicker right now. Okay. So before we kind of dive into all of the sleep stuff, let's first just start with what is occupational therapy. Because sometimes people just don't know. Sometimes I don't know. But according to the occupational therapy practice framework, occupational therapy can be defined as the therapeutic use of everyday life occupations with persons, groups, or populations for the purpose of enhancing or enabling participation. And so with that definition, it's important to clarify what are occupations. And occupations is just a word to describe simply daily activities that are meaningful to you. So this could be brushing your teeth, driving your car, going to a social gathering, attending this, and sleep. So occupational therapy involves using one's meaningful daily activities as a therapeutic means to improve one's participation in such activities. So then the next question is, why can OTs address sleep? And so sleep is an occupation. And so for, I'd say, almost every single human person on this planet, sleep is a very meaningful daily activity. And so sleep can include identifying the need for sleep and rest. So I'd like recognizing when you're tired and when you need to rest, preparing for sleep, but then also actually sleeping and resting.
Sorry, everybody. Okay, so as we've said, we are from Kids in Motion, and the Kids in Motion, we serve multiple families in the Bismarck, Mandan, and really kind of more rural areas as well. And we have occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathology, and then there's also Ashley Wagner is a chiropractor who also works out of Kids in Motion. And our motto, I don't know if that's the right word. Motto is to enhance the lives of children and helping families succeed. And we really strive for that like family collaboration. And so just kind of whatever the family comes with, that's the problem. We want to just help them be more successful. So for our learning objectives for today, we're going to talk first kind of about just what is the impact of sleep on daily functioning. If you're not getting appropriate sleep, what is that going to look like? And then we're going to talk about the sleep recommendations for kiddos from birth to 18, like how much sleep you should be getting, signs of poor sleep, and then that impact of poor sleep on daily functioning. And then we're going to move into more of our strategies for how can we improve sleep? How can we enhance bedtime routines? We're going to talk a lot about the sensory systems and how those can impact sleep, and then just creating a healthy sleep environment. So our first objective is to identify the impact of sleep on daily functioning. So, sleep recommendations for each stage of development. So there's going to be kind of a couple different graphs that we have here, but in 2016, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they had a big panel of 13 experts in sleep, and they kind of looked over all the research that they could find, and they came together to develop consensus recommendations for how much sleep a child should have based on their age. And so we kind of have it listed here, and they didn't include children younger than 4 months because they said that like birth to 4 month age is just so variable that they couldn't come up with a specific consensus. And we want to know that sleep needs vary by child, but just kind of keeping in mind where your child is and knowing that this is the recommended hours of sleep that they should get. And we'll talk a little bit later about what can happen if they're getting too much sleep, not enough sleep, or overall poor sleep.
Okay, so before I dive into the infant sleep recommendations, I'm curious what ages the kiddos are that you guys have, or the teenagers that you guys have. So feel free to throw out ages. Okay, we got 5 and 7-year-olds. Okay, 1, 2, 2, and 4.
Okay.
Woo! Okay.
Little. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
amazing.
That's wow.
Okay. Okay, so a little older, 12 and 14. 8-year-old. Okay, 5, 6, and 9. Okay, so we have a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
We have the little bitty ones and a little bit older. Great, because we're going to cover all of that. Okay, so this is for you, the little ones. Okay. So I took all of this information from Huckleberry, and Huckleberry is this organization that has a bunch of sleep consultants that put out a bunch of helpful information. So that's where this is coming from. So I'm not going to go through each one, but this chart does a great job at breaking down the sleep needs for infants for the first 6 months of life. And as you can see, it changes almost on a monthly basis. So infants are rapidly changing their sleep needs as they develop. So one thing it's important to look at is how much sleep they need. But another thing that's very impactful for sleep, especially for infants, is no, that's okay. Is is their wake windows. Okay, so not only how long are they sleeping, but how long are they awake? So during the first year of life, a baby's wake window can greatly affect their sleep quality and their sleep duration. So for example, if your infant is awake for too long, then they might become overtired and miss a sleep opportunity. But then if they're not awake long enough, then they're going to take a shorter nap, and then they're not going to sleep as well later and then be overtired again. So it's important to pay attention to both of those parts of this table. Okay, so then here's the recommendations for the second half of the first year of life. And as you can see, the sleep needs become more stable as they near that first year, which is helpful. And then, so the next slide, by the time they're a year and a half until they're about 4 years, a child is expected to have about 1 nap a day. Again, as Kaitlyn said, sleep needs do vary by child. Every child is different, but about 1 nap per day for that frame of time. But then again, you can see that wake windows are still relevant even up until 4 years of age. Definitely something to pay attention to. All right, so now we can talk about sleepy cues. So sleepy cues are simply signs that a person is ready for sleep. And so for infants, this can be helpful too, especially if you're trying to figure out each unique child and what their needs are, because not every single baby is going to need, okay, you've been awake for 30 minutes, now it's time to sleep. Okay, so you can also pay attention to their sleepy cues, which means they're ready for sleep. So for infants, when they're tired, they're going to start staring off into space. They're going to yawn. They're going to have red, flushed eyebrows. They'll start to avoid eye contact. Again, just staring off into space. They might rub their eyes and then just be a little fussy. And then you know if they're overtired, if they start crying a lot, kind of like when they talk about the witching hour, you know, everybody probably knows that. And then they get a really rigid body. They're not relaxed. And they'll even push you away at times. So there's for infants. And then toddlers, they're kind of similar. They'll zone out. Their activity will decrease. Although, I know it didn't say this. I feel like sometimes they get hyperactive too. They start, to get in the zoomies. They'll cuddle and seek comfort, yawn, rub their eyes, and then get a little more whiny too. So those are sleepy cues for infants and toddlers. But I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on what you think sleepy cues are going to be for adolescents or teenagers, or even your 12 and 14-year-olds, your 6-year-olds, or even us as adults. So if you have any ideas of what those might be, feel free to throw them out. The same as toddlers.
Fair. Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not as coherent.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
A little more crabby. They don't listen as well.
Mm.
Yep.
Mhm. Mhm.
So similar to the toddlers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A little sassier. Mm-hmm. Yep. So you guys are already picking up on when it's time to probably get ready for sleep. So yes, short-tempered. Yep. So they say being irritable, losing focus, slower reaction time, yawning, and then heavy eyelids. And then everything else you guys said. It's definitely relevant. Great job.
I get a headache when I'm like super overtired.
Yep.
And we both have infants at home, so we're both kind of in the. I just went through a 4-month sleep regression with my daughter, so I was like, "Whew, these were all I was having all of these, all of them at once." All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about some signs of poor sleep. So what that's going to look like when your child is not getting quality sleep. So a whole kind of list of them. So, one thing is if they are consistently waking multiple times during the night, difficulty falling asleep. They kind of say if they're taking consistently longer than 30 minutes to fall asleep, really restless. Maybe they're just tossing and turning. There might even be sweating a lot. You might find them like in a completely different position than where you put them down on the whole other side of the bed. Just daytime sleepiness, if they just kind of seem really groggy throughout the day. Behavioral challenges, we kind of talked about that increased crabbiness, just more emotional. Snoring and breathing problems and mouth breathing. So basically we are designed to breathe through our nose. And so the purpose of that is that when we breathe through our nose, it filters the air, which helps with our overall immune health. And then it also increases the oxygen level that's going to our brain. So if a child is mouth breathing, they are getting less oxygen, their air is not as filtered. And it can have long-term impacts on their overall sleep, but it can also impact their overall like jaw development, their airway, can affect even like their teeth. Because what happens, so if you have your mouth closed at rest, your tongue should be sitting on the roof of your mouth. So everyone kind of think about it like if your mouth is closed, your tongue should be resting on the roof of your mouth. But if your mouth is open and kind of relaxed and you're sleeping, it's going to pull that tongue down. So as you're kind of trying to breathe through, it's pulling the tongue down. And again, it impacts the airway, it impacts the filtering of the air. So that is a sign, and you can signs of mouth breathing are one, if their mouth is open, even just having their lips parted can be a sign that they can be a mouth breather. A lot of drooling can be a sign of mouth breathing. Um, Snoring, noisy breathing, bad breath can all be signs and may be something that I would recommend if you're noticing that. I would reach out to like their primary care doctor and talk about that to determine if maybe some further assessment of their airway needs to be done if they are a chronic mouth breather, because it can just impact their overall quality of sleep. And mouth breathing is also associated. There's kind of a link with mouth breathing and bedwetting, because another thing that happens is when you are mouth breathing, it can kind of impact your ability to get into that deep sleep. And so when you're not getting into a deep enough sleep, your body doesn't release this hormone called antidiuretic hormone that suppresses the function of the kidneys at night. So basically, it's not telling the kidneys that it's nighttime. So your body's making urine, and then it causes them to kind of bedwet because they're making all this urine and they're not getting into a deep enough sleep. So they're kind of arousing enough that they're bedwetting, but not enough to like alert them to get up and go to the bathroom. So there's kind of a link between those two things, but bedwetting in itself is also a sign of poor sleep, as is sleepwalking and night terrors and just resistance overall to go to bed. So are we going to talk more about night terrors? We didn't prepare a ton on that, but if you have questions, absolutely kind of jump on in on that. Do you have a question right now? that is is it happening kind of like nightly? Yeah, nighttime. Yeah. 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 Have you I feel like from my research that I've talked, from my understanding, I would talk like immediately to the primary care provider. Have you like reached out to, that would be my first honest step. Just that, yeah, yeah. That's honestly the first step that I would do. The Huckleberry app, which Maddie had referred to earlier, it's designed by sleep consultants, and it has a ton of information about, pretty much all of these. There is information on bedwetting, there is information on mouth breathing, information on night terrors as well. So I would definitely check that out because there's information specifically for that. But I would say that would be more of a referral for, there is a reason that that's happening and that maybe their sleep needs to be further evaluated and assessed. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, when do your children, do they remember the night terrors? Okay.
Mhm.
Yep. So then,
Yes.
yep.
Yep.
So those are other factors.
Yep.
So night terrors, yes, will happen during like the first, I think, third of the night. So it sounds like 2 hours in. That's a clue that's a night terror. And if they don't remember it, then it's a night terror. So it sounds like that's likely what it is.
Mhm.
One way to troubleshoot it, so definitely, like Kaitlyn said, definitely talk to their primary care physician to see if they have any other ideas on how to further assess that. But one way to kind of troubleshoot it is addressing their overall sleep. I'm currently working with a kiddo who was having night terrors every single night, but it ended up being because he was overtired. He wasn't sleeping enough, and the night terrors went away once his sleep got back on schedule. So definitely, as we go through this, see if there's any other areas that your kiddos could work on. Try that along with
Yeah.
checking with the doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sleep is such a like complex. I think when you and I started like researching for this topic, we were like, where do we even start? Like we're just like, there's so many, I think there's so many areas where sleep impacts everything, and so many things impact sleep. So I think it's very multifaceted. But so good question. Okay. So moving on. Oh, the impact of low quality sleep. So let's talk about how is going to impact our daily life. You wanna move on for me? Okay. So things we kind of talked about already, that increased irritability and mood swings, just hyperactivity, can almost mimic the signs of ADHD and the symptoms of ADHD, hyperactivity and impulsivity. You can see aggression, oppositional behavior, just overall reduced frustration tolerance, poor concentration, and exaggerated emotional responses. I think all of these seem pretty self-explanatory, and we've all probably experienced them ourselves. So, going back to that study or that consensus that the American Academy of Sleep Medicine developed, it's really important that we don't get too much sleep and we don't get too little sleep. We want to have just the right amount, because they noted that there was adverse health impacts with both having too much sleep and too little. So too little sleep there leads to attention, behavior, learning problems. Overall, just increased risks of accidents, which be kind of like more of that injury prone. You're not sure where your body is. You just kind of feel all noodly. And it also is associated with increased obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and depression. And then specifically for teenagers, having too little sleep was shown to have an increased risk for self-harm and suicidal ideation and attempts. And then on the opposite spectrum of that, having too much sleep was also associated with hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and mental health problems. So it really is important that we're kind of knowing that finding just the right amount of sleep is very, very important, and trying to find balance within our other daily activities. So, like Maddie said, for babies, wake windows are so important, but also for toddlers, preschoolers, children, adolescents, our wake windows are also really important. If we're not getting enough like stimulation or the right, if we're not noticing when we need rest, then it's impacting our sleep overall as well. So moving on to, let's talk about how we can improve some sleep. So we're going to talk first about the sensory systems. So you guys already got the handout, so you know that there are 8 sensory systems, but I'm curious if you guys knew before tonight that we had 8 sensory systems. Do you guys all know that? Yeah. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so okay, fair enough. So maybe I should quiz you guys and ask you what the sensory systems are. Okay, so first we're going to just talk about what is sensory processing. It is the process of our nervous system receiving, interpreting, and responding to sensory information from the environment and the body. And it's like a subconscious process that we are not thinking about. So our 8 senses here, I think so. We know touch, taste, smell, hearing, vision. Did I get them all? Touch, taste, smell, hearing, vision. And then the 3 down here on the bottom are the ones that people don't know as much about, but are vitally important. So just as a quick review for those who maybe had that previous training, but our proprioceptive system they are our receptors in our muscles and our joints. And it's all about telling us where our body's at in space and helping us so we use the right force with activities. So if we're going to take a drink of water, we don't just like throw it over, or it helps us to know, like if I were to have my eyes closed, I would still know that I'm standing, and just kind of helps us know where we are. Our vestibular system, there are receptors in our inner ear, and that kind of relates to our head position. That's what tells us when we're moving in a car. It tells us when we're hanging upside down in the monkey bars. It kind of just helps us, again, kind of have that awareness in space. And then interoception is super, super important. That is our like internal awareness of our body. And that also ties into, do we have that awareness of that need for rest? It's what tells us our hunger cues, our thirst cues. It helps to regulate blood pressure, our heart rate, but then also it's related to that emotional processing and recognizing body clues that tell us if we're feeling angry, telling us if we're feeling sad, telling us if we're tired. So that is really, really important. So kind of referring to the handout, let me see, I have a handout here. So I gave you guys a handout that we kind of developed specifically talking about each input, and these are very generic. I want to give a disclaimer that every child is different. Every person has a unique sensory profile. However, these are kind of general things that are either going to be very calming and relaxing for our nervous system versus alerting and waking up our nervous system. So, you might have heard the terms like a sensory seeker versus like that kid who just like can't sit still. They just are bouncing off the walls. They love to fidget. They just can't get enough movement versus a sensory sensitive kid. They're the kid that doesn't like loud noises. They may have a hard time with like certain clothing textures, or a picky eater. Those are kind of like 2 common profiles, but it's important to know that every person has a unique sensory profile, and sensory processing occurs within context. So there's so many other things happening in the environment too that kind of impacts our response to a sensory input. But we're going to refer to this a little bit more later too. But I think it's important to realize that when we're thinking about our bedtime, we want to make sure that we're including more things that are in the calming category of sensory input and not in the alerting category. And we might not even realize that we are choosing things that are alerting. So yeah, like I said, there are 2 things that kind of that we also want to consider: the sensory environment and the bedroom. And is the bedroom a calming sensory space, or is it an alerting sensory space? And then also thinking about, what are you doing like 30 minutes before bedtime, an hour before bedtime, 2 hours before bedtime? Because all of that input is going to impact our nervous system's response. So we kind of to just give you a little bit more moving into this. So like comparing these two pictures. So the picture on the left has dim lights. The walls are blank besides like there's not a bunch of pictures on the wall or clutter. There is like a little lamp with like stars, but it's kind of just supposed to be more of just a little bit, I would say, like muted colors versus the picture on the right is a very kind of bright, chaotic pattern. There's a lot of sunlight. There's a lot of pictures on the wall. So just even thinking about how much more our vision is processing comparing these two pictures. So
That's my bedroom. Just kidding.
So, and I think, you know, looking at a picture is one thing, but then also considering being in that space and how that's going to make your body feel. So looking at smell, so the one on the left is more of lavender, more of that like calming scent versus to me, the smell of coffee is very alerting to my system. And it kind of just tells me like it's time to wake up for the day. Vestibular, so movement, linear movement, meaning like back and forth or up and down is relaxing and calming to the nervous system. So a rocking chair that's why rocking is so soothing versus like a tire swing. Any movement that is very like irregular or moves the head out of being upright. So being upside down or spinning around, that's going to be very alerting. So kind of thinking about like, are we playing a game before bedtime where the kids are upside down and we're kind of wrestling and maybe that's just maybe not the quite right choice because maybe it's really alerting their vestibular system and making them feel really awake and maybe we need to try more calming vestibular activities. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Mhm. Yep. Yep. So, yeah. Yes. Oh, so I would think about it. Okay. So you're doing a rocking movement, which is that like linear. And just because it's like that intense and their head might be moving a little bit like forward and backward, that is still really calming and alerting versus like thinking about being on a merry-go-round or a roller coaster. Um, kind of thinking about why like a lot of times kids fall asleep in the car. It's because it's that linear vestibular movement, like the car is just going. And then oftentimes, why do kids like my daughter absolutely hates stoplights because it's that stop, go, and that unpredictable versus that like rhythmic rocking back and forth is really calming. Also, you're not just providing vestibular input, you're also providing like proprioceptive and touch if you're hugging them and providing pressure. So, like our senses don't necessarily just work alone, but no, more when I was talking about like, I'm talking more about like very dramatic, like spinning or like completely upside down. But that linear going like back and forth is really calming. So, yeah, yep. Is there like a specific name for it? Yeah. I mean, to me, it just like sounds like a really good like sensory activity, but I'm if there's a specific name for it, that's awesome. But yeah, to me, it just sounds like you're really tapping into that vestibular, that movement, and also providing that like deep pressure, which is super, super calming.
Is it okay if I add?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of because you were mentioning how you have to go really far forward and really far back. Where some kids, when you're rocking them in the rocking chair, it's just a little bit. But it reminds me of my son who's 8 months, where usually if he's kind of a little fussy, we can do a little bounce and that's enough. But if he's really fussy, I'm doing some deep squats and like really getting into it. Just because it's a more intense linear input for him and it's much more calming. So that's kind of what that reminds me of. And I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. And my daughter is like, she doesn't really like rocking. She likes to bounce up and down, which is also linear. So linear is kind of like this or like this. So a tool we've really used is like an exercise ball, because I'm just like, sometimes those deep squats, like that's just too much for me. So I'm like, I'm going to sit so I can bounce. But she likes like intense bouncing, like sometimes like, okay, like we're really bouncing, and that is just really calming for her system, but it's that linear movement. And also like back and forth is also calming. It's kind of like a spectrum. So it goes from like linear, and then like horizontal, and then like diagonal would be like a little bit more alerting, and then you're like turning around is like the most alerting, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of a hierarchy. So great question though. Yeah. So, and then looking at hearing. So I think we would all probably say that the ocean sound would probably be a little bit more relaxing and calming to our nervous system compared to being at the concert. They're also thinking about there's the visual system that ties into both of those as well. So just wanted to give you some pictures to think about it. And then taste, kind of thinking about maybe like a warm cup of tea versus Sour Patch Kids. I look at Sour Patch Kids and I just start salivating and get that taste in my mouth. So I don't know if anybody else does, but and then our last system is our proprioceptive system, and we like to call this our universal tool. So when in doubt, try what's called heavy work or proprioceptive input. So, and I think a good example is thinking about exercise for ourselves. So let's say that you are really tired in the morning and you are having a hard time waking up, but you decide to go and do a workout. That workout is going to alert our nervous system and help get us into that like just right state, so we feel more awake, more focused, more energized, versus if you've ever felt really, really stressed or overwhelmed or overstimulated and you go do a workout, it has that opposite effect. It makes us feel more relaxed, more calm, and just overall better. So that is the power of proprioceptive input, and exercise is an example of that. And why that happens is because proprioceptive input releases serotonin, which is that feel good chemical in our brain that tells our body that we feel safe, which I think is so important for our foster kiddos who have experienced trauma. They need to feel safe in their body and they need to feel in control. So proprioceptive input is a huge tool. And there's also two different kinds of proprioceptive input. It can either be active, meaning that the child is doing it. They are running, they are jumping, they are like using their muscles to lift heavy things, push heavy things, pull heavy things, carry heavy things. And then there's passive, meaning that it's done to the child. So a weighted blanket would be an example of that. Providing like you hugging and rocking, your hugging is that passive proprioceptive input. So um, great, great, great tool. Like I said, if you're ever in doubt, this is where I would start. And then, so I think it's important to kind of know that we want to kind of look for signs of a child being regulated versus dysregulated. So regulated is not synonymous with calm. Regulated means that their level of energy meets the task demands. So if they're supposed to be sitting at their desk and participating in a school activity, they're doing that. Versus when they're out on the playground, they shouldn't be so tired and lethargic that they can't keep up. So you will know that a child is regulated if they're engaged, they're following directions, you're going to see more social interaction, more smiles, and they're just overall comfortable. Versus dysregulated, they're going to be zoning out. They might be fidgeting, they might be walking or running away, just decrease in social engagement. And then you're going to see even escalation to emotional reactivity, shutdown, and then the fight, flight, freeze response. So, this sensory input can lead to that fight or flight response, because all that is a sympathetic nervous system response to something that they perceive as a threat, stress, or loss of control. It can be from a variety of things, but these are kind of some physical indications that a child is in fight or flight response. They can have dilated pupils. They might be like really flushed or red, or could also be pale. You're going to notice that their breathing is increased as well as their heart rate could be trembling. And that's when you really know that they are, I like to call it like their upstairs and downstairs brain. And when this is happening, they are in their downstairs brain, and logic and reasoning is not going to help them. And we need to first kind of co-regulate them. And proprioceptive input that giving that release of that serotonin can be really, really, really calming. However, when a child is in a like fight or flight response, touch from another person can be very can feel very intense and maybe adverse. So you could try to use something like rolling a ball on them, or like squishing them with a pillow or a cushion, or wrapping them up in a blanket versus giving them a hug or trying to give them a massage, because their body just might be too much like don't touch me, don't look at me, or in that shutdown, whereas touch through an object is a little bit more our body can accept it as a little bit more safe, if that makes sense. So, okay. Any questions so far? Kind of rambled a lot about the sensory processing, sensory systems, but I think they're really, really important. Any questions? Okay. All right.
Okay. And we'll kind of circle back to all the things that
Mhm.
Kaitlyn went over, because they're all super relevant in sleep.
Yes.
Even though a lot of regulation happens during the day, it impacts sleep, and making sure that we incorporate regulating and calming activities during bedtime and during just preparing for sleep is going to be super important. And then avoiding any activities that are alerting. So we'll come back to that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about creating a healthy sleep environment. Okay, so what is the most optimal environment for sleep? So something that's dark, quiet, cool, kind of sounds like a cave, but it also has to be comfortable, so it's not a cave. Okay, so the first aspect is going to be lighting, so dark. So having a dark room is the most ideal, as darkness signals to our brains to produce melatonin, which helps us sleep and keep us asleep until morning. And then another aspect to look at is sound. So you want to avoid any sounds that can disrupt your sleep cycles. Even the smallest change in sound or changes in tempo, even from a lullaby, can be alerting and disturbing for the sleep cycles. So it's best to have a quiet environment or to use a consistent sound like white noise. That can drown out other sounds if you live in maybe even just a noisy household, if you're trying to put younger ones down while others are still awake, or just in a noisy neighborhood. And so if we kind of pause and think about these two factors of lighting and sound, it's worth bringing up how some teenagers and even adults claim that having the TV on while they sleep is helpful. And it may be in certain aspects that it might be helping them calm down after a long day to get ready to sleep. And also it might serve as a form of white noise to drown out other sounds. However, it's going to increase the brightness of the room. So then the melatonin is going to go down. And then also it's going to present those changes in sound, even if it is like cooking show or something, there's still going to be changes in sound that will interrupt their sleep cycles throughout the night. So they might not even fully wake up to recognize that that's happening, but they'll still be becoming alert and then falling back asleep more frequently and won't feel as well as rested. So then another factor to look at is temperature. And so cool is better. So for babies and young children, ideally you want 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and then adolescents and then adults 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit. And so this is because of natural thermal regulation. Big word just to basically say as your body's preparing to sleep, it cools down on its own. And so a cooler room can help facilitate that process. It can signal to your body of like, okay, sleep is coming. It also can facilitate REM sleep, which is helpful for just feeling more rested in the morning. And then it can also reduce night sweats, because who wants to be sweaty when they're sleeping? No one wants that. It's hard to sleep when you're sweaty. And then another factor is the function or purpose of your sleep environment. So try to keep your children's bed as a place for sleep and not for play or punishment, because you want the bed to be a positive experience. If they associate it with negative things, then sleep is also going to have that association with it. So try to discourage your children from playing there, because that's also going to be more alerting if their body is used to playing in that space. And then avoid punishing there by having them sit on their bed when they're in trouble, for example. That way, when it is time for bed, their bed can serve as a cue for their mind and their body of like, hey, this is a place for rest. This is where I feel safe. And this is a positive experience for me.
So, just a couple of things that kind of tying back into our sensory system. So, a few things that might be helpful. This these pictures, this little boy here is in lycra bed sheets. A lot of kiddos that I have worked with have had really good success with that. Versus, to be honest, I feel like a lot of kids have had better success with something like this compared to a weighted blanket. I feel like weighted blankets have become more, I guess, like mainstream or like popular. People are more aware of them, but a lycra bed sheet essentially is like just like a really stretchy spandexy fabric, and it fits around the bed. And so essentially it provides them with just that like feedback and kind of feels like a hug, but they can kind of move and kick and get that input, but it also is not super thick, so it's not going to heat their body up. It's going to be really breathable. Another really good tool, vibration, also provides a lot of proprioceptive input that can be really, really calming. And so you can buy like vibrating stuffed animals. You can, and a lot of kids like them, they can hold them, they can snuggle them. They're also really soft, but then they can also give that extra proprioceptive input. And then just also thinking about white noise machines and then different like sensory lights that might bring a little bit of brightness into the room, especially for kiddos who might be scared of the complete darkness. But we want something that's going to be more like these lights where they kind of just like the bubbles just kind of go up and down. It's more of just that calming movement versus something that's going to have a lot of light that's flashing and bright. We want something very calming and soothing. So, kind of just thinking about that, what kind of things we have in the environment, whether we're taking things away and like reducing clutter in the environment, or we're adding tools, can help just make the sleep environment more conducive to sleep.
Yeah, and then kind of knowing what tools would be helpful is really going to depend on just observing what your child is seeking. Like, are they a child that wants hugs all the time before bed, or that gets really irritated by their bed sheets? Then maybe the lycra bed sheets will be for them, you know. Or if your child really loves car rides and is always calmed down by riding in the car and falls asleep in the car, they might like the vibrating stuffed animal. Just to kind of think about what kinds of sensory input they're drawn to, and then try to incorporate that into their sleep environment. So now we have screen time. Of course, we got to talk about screen time. Didn't think you'd get away from that one. Okay. So screen time is associated with poor sleep quality. And this is just a well-researched area. It's just kind of a fact. And so why? So screens cause alertness and wakefulness because blue light helps produce cortisol because it stimulates our brain into thinking that it's earlier in the day. And so then on the contrary, our brain also slows or even stops the production of melatonin, which is what we need to have a good night's rest. And so, according to the National Sleep Foundation and Stanford Medicine, it's recommended to put screens away at least 1 hour to 2 hours before bedtime. And so another thing to kind of consider too is if you think that your child is a big sensory seeker, where they're kind of all over the place, kind of bouncing off the walls, decreasing screen time throughout the day can be very helpful, as they'll spend less time sitting, staring at a screen, and then more time moving their bodies to fill up that big cup they have for movement throughout the day, rather than trying to get all their zoomies out before bed. Just another thing to consider.
Can I add one more thing about screen time?
Yes.
I think one thing too is that sometimes like we know that like screens are part of our life and we all use them at different times. And so if you are offering a child screen time, sometimes even considering the type of show that you're providing. So like for example, a lot of Cocomelon, I'm going to hate on Cocomelon a little bit. Cocomelon is very there have been studies that talk about how like the transitions are really fast, the colors are very bright, and so it's a very alerting, and it really kind of like draws kids in because things just kind of keep happening, versus older cartoons where there's more muted colors, maybe even black and white, can be less stimulating. So even thinking about even just maybe switching out the type of cartoon that you're providing or the type of shows you're watching might just be a good tool to help still give them that opportunity for screen time, but maybe not something that's so alerting or something that they're just going to have such a hard time transitioning away from. So that's a good tip.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about bedtime routines. So bedtime routines are very important. So they have been associated with overall better sleep duration, better sleep quality. And as you can see, having a bedtime routine is correlated with having an earlier bedtime, so not staying up too late, falling asleep faster, reduced nighttime awakenings, and then a longer sleep duration overall. And one major factor is that a good bedtime routine signals to one's body and the brain that it is time to sleep. Okay, so how do you create a beneficial bedtime routine? So we're going to take a look at these 5 different qualities of a bedtime routine that supports better sleep. So we'll start with consistent. So it's important to be diligent about ensuring your child's bedtime is the same time every night, give or take 15, 30 minutes for the desired sleep time. So then when you're trying to figure that out, it's going to be looking at the sleep recommendations for your child and also your own family's schedule and routine of what's realistic for that. Because if it's going to be consistent, it has to be realistic. So kind of reflecting what that would be and then try to stick to it. Obviously, there's going to be days where, you know, you're going to grandma's or you're on a vacation or something. But as much as possible, having that bedtime the same every night. And then another important part of the consistent factor of the bedtime routine are the routine steps. So every night, ensuring that the steps are the same and in the same order every single night. And that way the routine is predictable for the child and it gives them more of a sense of control. They know what to expect. And then their body and their mind, even subconsciously, is like, okay, I know after these things happen, I sleep. And then it helps prepare them for that. So the first one is consistent. The next one is timing. You want to make sure that you guys allow for enough time for them to wind down. So babies need about 30 minutes to wind down from playing or eating, whatever they're doing, to sleep. And then toddlers and preschoolers need about 45 minutes. And then as you age, it gets a little bit longer. So for adults, it might be an hour, 2 hours. So you kind of think about stimulating activities and then when you need to start participating in those more calming ones. So it might take some trial and error to figure out what that kind of looks like for each child, but make sure you allow for enough time so you don't have to rush. And then if pressed for time, if you are pressed for time once in a while, say you get home late, because life happens, you know, it's probably already a rush to get to go to bed already as it is. But instead of skipping steps of the bedtime routine, try to just shorten them. So instead of reading 3 books tonight, we're just going to read 1. Or we might even just read a poem that's 3 words long, you know, but still just getting that step in so then their body still has that cue. Okay, so we have consistent, timing, and then purposeful. So each step of the routine should be purposeful. And so that's purposeful for the child, but also purposeful for you as parents, because again, you don't have all the time in the world to do a bedtime routine. Okay, so what you're doing should matter and not be wasted time for you or the kiddo. So Mindell and Williamson in 2017, they did a study and identified the following 4 areas here of a bedtime routine that can be helpful for children from the ages of 0 to 5 years of age. And those areas are nutrition, hygiene, communication, and quality time / touch. So nutrition for infants, that's usually going to be feeding, whether it's breastfeeding or bottles. And then for toddlers or preschoolers, that could be a healthy snack or simply just a healthy dinner. Could be something that preps them for bed. And another area is that hygiene. And so that could be whether they have a bath or a shower or maybe brush their teeth. And then communication. So that could be in a book, like reading a story, maybe singing them a lullaby, or just talking to them about their day or things that you love about them or that you're proud of them for. And then quality time or touch. And so that could be giving them a massage, cuddling them, rocking them, anything like that. And then kind of looking at how you could apply these to older children. They could be adapted to also meet their needs. So nutrition could be maybe the contrary of avoiding a heavy dinner before bed, avoiding that caffeine, just being mindful of what their nutrition is like prior to sleep. And then hygiene could be, okay, you got your healthy dinner in, now you're in a shower. And then communication could be maybe they read a book, or maybe if they are religious, they say their prayers. And then quality time or touch could be they just learn how to do different relaxation techniques while they're laying in bed, getting ready to sleep, taking deep breaths. but also could be just quality time with themselves or with you, of just doing self-affirmations of like, I am good. I had a good day. Or just making a gratitude list of like, okay, I know before I shut my eyes, I'm going to think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. So just something to kind of ponder as you guys are reflecting on what your children's bedtime routines entail. Just kind of looking at these 4 different categories and seeing what would be realistic. Because again, they don't have to be long. Nutrition, likely everyone's eating supper. Hygiene, hopefully everyone's brushing their teeth. Communication, reading or saying your prayers. That doesn't have to take more than 2 minutes if you only have 2 minutes. And then that quality time, that touch could be maybe giving mom a hug before bed or thinking of 3 things I'm grateful for. So in total, it doesn't have to take too long. Okay, so those are consistent, timing, and purposeful. And then we have individualized. So meeting your child where they're at. Again, as Kaitlyn has emphasized before, everyone's so different. So attend to, and kind of thinking of their sensory systems too. What is dysregulating for this child, and what's regulating for them? And individualizing their bedtime routine to meet those needs. And then adapting as they age as well. Because now your 5-year-old is now a 10-year-old. Their bedtime routine is going to look different. And then finally, positive. This is also going to be a quality of a beneficial bedtime routine. So keeping the routine positive so that bedtime is positive and sleep is seen as a good experience. And then another thing to kind of think about with the sensory side of things is so with positive, I wonder if there's any challenging behaviors that happen around bedtime. Never, because no one's emotional at bedtime. But some areas to kind of troubleshoot are, so just kind of being aware of what's stimulating and alerting for them and try to put that at the beginning of the bedtime routine. So from one example is bath. So for some kids, that's going to be very calming. And so maybe put that towards the end, right before they go to sleep. But for some kids, that's going to get them wired and just hype. So maybe put that first. So kind of think about the order that you're doing things. Or if brushing their teeth is a huge fight, put that first and don't leave that for right before they're supposed to get into their sheets. Another area to kind of help keep it positive is to give them choices. It's like, okay, you need to put your pajamas on, but I'm going to give you the option of this pair of pajamas or this pair of pajamas to give them some more of that control. Because when they're tired, they probably do feel a little out of control. So giving that to them as much as they can. Do you want to put the toothpaste on your toothbrush or should I put the toothpaste on your toothbrush? Because in the end, they're still doing what you want them to do, but it gives them a little more of that control. And then another way is using visual schedules. So once they kind of have their bedtime routine more set in stone, maybe printing off a couple pictures that represent each of those steps so then they can see, okay, I did this, and now we're going to do this, and then I'm going to sleep. So then again, giving them that predictability. It also holds them and you accountable. So if they're like, well, I just want to play one more game or I just want 10 more minutes on this, it's like, nope, this is next on our step. And you can bring them back to that. Okay, so here's an example of a bedtime routine for a 5-year-old. So it's not shown on here, but first they have that supper for that nutrition. And then we take a bath and put on the PJs and then brush teeth. So that's the hygiene. And then read a book for that communication. And then turn on the sound machine. And then sleep. And so then not really shown on here either is the touch or quality time aspect could be built in. Maybe you could do words of affirmation while they're brushing their teeth of like, you did so great at your homework today, or I'm so proud of how you helped your sister. Or maybe cuddling while you read the book to build in that quality time and that touch. Because another thing I've seen too, I've read a little bit about in research, but also seen with some of the kiddos that I work with, is oftentimes they're just seeking attention from their parent. It's just been so busy all day that some of the behaviors come out at bedtime is because it's their last chance to have that connection with mom or dad, and then it ends up being negative because they're seeking it in an inappropriate manner by showing negative behaviors. So by building in that quality time that they're seeking, can be very helpful for some families. So then it's already there, they can expect it, they know it's coming, and they don't have to fight for it in an ineffective way. Okay, so now we have a couple questions. So for you guys just to kind of ponder, what are the steps of your child's bedtime routine? You don't have to share. You can kind of just think about it on your own. You probably already have been as we've been talking.
Yes. And kind of thinking even more, thinking about that. Does that routine have those 5 qualities that Maddie talked about? Is it consistent? Does it have enough time? Does it have those purposeful nutrition, hygiene, quality time, communication? Is it individualized, and does it include regulating activities? And is it positive? Kind of just some things to think about. Or maybe are you missing like one of them that maybe you want to try to add one of them into your routine or try to implement that. Yeah. So, and kind of, yeah, just thinking about maybe what is going really well in the bedtime routines that you guys are trying to implement right now, or what's something that you'd want to change. So, does anybody want to share anything or have any questions? Okay. So,
Yeah, go for it.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, because
Oh, no.
no. Say, I mean, I don't. Yeah. Yeah. No. I think so being consistent and knowing that okay, yes, we don't take a bath every night, but we're still doing some of those other things. We're still putting pajamas on. We're still brushing our teeth, or maybe it could be simple of like maybe we just wipe our face or something, or maybe we put our hair back in a ponytail before we go to bed. I think it's just knowing that it's okay if it's not done every night, but it's still part of that routine, and they know that when it is bath night, where is that bath going to fall in that routine? It's going to fall before we brush our teeth, or it's going to fall after. So, but yes, no, I don't bathe my infant every night either. So,
No, that's a good point too, because this is what research shows, but it also has to be realistic. And so if it's realistic for your families to do that every other night or however so often, but that's consistent and your child knows what to expect, I think that's the most important thing.
and then finally, also thinking about kind of reflecting on, when Maddie was talking about, so depending on the age, 30, 45 minutes, an hour before bedtime. Is that hour before bedtime, is it including things that are really alerting, or is it including things that are really calming? And maybe is the child or children, are they showing signs of regulation, or are they very dysregulated during their bedtime routine? And maybe trying to figure out if you're noticing that dysregulation, maybe it's happening at the same time in there, that same part of that routine, or the same time every night. And then trying to just kind of put your problem solving hat on, like, why do you think that's happening? Is it in anticipation of something they know they're coming? Is it in response to a sensory input in their environment? I think can kind of go like both ways. And so is there something that you could either add or take away to just help them feel more regulated? And then so Maddie has a couple, whoops, sorry. There we go. Okay. Sorry.
So we just have a couple more points to touch on, and then we'll open it up for questions to kind of go back with whatever you guys want to talk about. So these are just a couple strategies for night wakings. So yeah, if your child is going to bed, fine, but then they wake up 10 times. Hopefully not that much, but if they're waking up at night. So the first one is that daytime regulation. So again, coming back to the sensory. Every single child, every single one of us has different buckets, kind of like how we like to describe it, for sensory input. And so if their buckets are not full, or if they're over full by bedtime, that can affect their restfulness at night, and which can be not so fun when it's happening, but it can also be a helpful tool. So if you're like, okay, he did not sleep very well last night, but I also know that we did not go to the park to play. He was kind of bouncing off the walls before bed. He did not get enough heavy work in. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to have him carry a bunch of heavy things. We're going to do a lot of jumping and crawling to give him that input to fill his bucket up, and then see if that helps him sleep better the next night. So that's one area to kind of consider. Another is if it's age appropriate, ensure they're getting enough daytime sleep. So if your child is still should be napping or is appropriate for naps, make sure that they're getting the naps, because sleep pressure, so the the feeling of like when we need to go to sleep builds the longer that we're awake. So some of us probably feel that sleep pressure right now. However, if an infant or a toddler misses a nap, their sleep pressure builds too quickly, which can lead to the child feeling overtired, increasing their cortisol, which makes them feel a little more stressed, and making it harder for them to fall asleep later and stay asleep, and then stay asleep longer. So that happened to one of the kiddos I was working with today. He, the day before, slept too long for a nap and then went to bed later. And then today missed a nap and then didn't go to bed until like 10 or 11. Because you would think, logically, you would think that if you miss a nap, you'd want to go to bed sooner, right? Like you'd feel sleepier sooner. But our bodies aren't always wired that way. So it's important to try to get those naps in if they need them. Another area is keeping bedtime visits brief and boring. So if your child's waking up frequently and wanting your attention and you do need to tend to them, do that, but try not to keep it exciting, because if they're seeking your attention, you're not going to want to necessarily meet that need if you don't want that behavior to continue. So be kind of boring. So don't come in like, hi, I'm here to help you. Just kind of help them and then leave. So that's another bad strategy to try. And then supporting your child in learning how to fall asleep on their own. So take this as you will. So not necessarily saying sleep training. If that's something you want to explore, go for it. But just encouraging your child to learn the skill of falling asleep, because it is a skill. And so there's a study by Reed et al. That says children who can fall asleep on their own at bedtime are more likely to fall back to sleep on their own if they wake up at night. And so what children are exposed to immediately before they go to sleep are what they will likely require to fall back asleep when they're spontaneously awakened at night. So for example, if the parent is present when they fall asleep, then they might or likely will want the parent to be present if they wake up again at night and need to go back to sleep. And so again, not saying you have to let your child cry it out. There's much gentler ways to approach that, and it's definitely worth looking into if that is something that is a consistent issue, especially as they get older. Another interesting strategy is the bedtime pass. And so are any of you familiar with that? No? Okay. So you can kind of like morph this into whatever you want it to look like. But the concept is, if your kiddo's early enough or older enough, you would give them a pass before bedtime, and you'd kind of judge it based off of your own situation. So if your kid's getting up about 3 times a night, you could give them a pass, 2 bedtime passes, which could be maybe a little card they decorate or something. And then if they wake up, they can come bring you the pass and then get whatever they need, whether it's another drink of water, going to the bathroom, another hug. And then they go back to sleep after they get that. And then they have another bedtime pass. They could bring that to you, get whatever they need to go back to bed. But then if they run out of their passes, then it's something where they will no longer, I guess I should kind of back up. So if they use their passes, then they don't get a prize or whatever kind of positive reinforcement you have. So for example, if they choose to keep their passes, they're 2 little tickets, and they wake up and they still have them, they didn't use them, then they could put that towards maybe a trip to the park or whatever sort of reward you guys would think would be meaningful to them. But then that way at night, they're laying in bed, they're like, do I want to go wake up mom again for another hug for the 5th time? Or do I want to save my pass because then I get to go to Sky Zone in 2 weeks, because I saved up all my passes for 2 weeks. So it just gives them that kind of like, then they kind of think about it a little bit more rather than spontaneously getting out of bed. So say, for example, though, they do get out of bed those 2 times, they used up their 2 passes, but then they get out of bed again. What do you do? So you should respond to, so they get up out of bed again, then give them kind of that brief and boring response of like, okay, I'm just going to gently and be boring and redirect you to your bed, and ignore whatever requests you have, because we're done. Yeah, so kind of, I don't know if I overcomplicated that. Any questions? Any questions on the bedtime pass? initially 4 years old kind of comes to my head. I feel like they would be able to kind of understand like the cause and effect of that. And it might kind of depend on where your child's at too, if you think they would be appropriate. And it's always something you could try. And if it's working, great. But if not, drop it and try it again later. Yeah. Trying to think if I was going to say anything else. Yeah. Bedtime pass.
That's what you're gonna say.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last one is just to assess for any underlying sleep concerns. So if your child is still and you've tried a lot of things and they still keep on waking up at night, go talk to their doctor and see if there is anything else underlying why they aren't sleeping well. Because it's definitely something that shouldn't be ignored and just powered through.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if I can reword the question. Okay, so the question was about using like supplements like melatonin, magnesium. Yes. Um, okay. I feel like, and this, I feel like when I have been posed this question before from kiddos, it's generally something that I kind of say that that is out of my scope of practice. And that would be something that I would talk to a physician about. I feel like I know, I feel like I've heard positive and negative things about it. And so I think it really kind of comes down to each child's individual needs. But I feel like that's something that anything related to more of like supplements, medication is just kind of out of my scope of practice. But would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We can't really say much on that topic. But then based off of what families have told me and their own experience with it, it's kind of the same where some find it helpful and some don't. Yeah. Good question though.
Yeah. I've had both positive and negative experiences from families with use of both of them. Specifically, I would say I feel like melatonin seems to be more common that people tend to use, but um I mean, I personally take magnesium, so I guess I can speak from my own experience and I like it, but I think yeah, it's kind of one of those just um an each individual person and more of a medical question, I think. Yeah. But good question. Okay.
All right. Last slide. Okay. So then we just kind of want to touch on strategies for early risers as well. So those kiddos that they're like, it's 5 a.m., let's go. So one area to kind of look at is maybe they need a later bedtime. Maybe they are going to bed too soon. And so they're getting enough sleep and then they're just waking up early because that's all their body needs. So it's one area to look at. Another is try to avoid punishing your child if they are getting up early. It's not something that they can really help. So rather than punishing them, teach them how to manage those early awakenings, give them the tools and strategies they need to manage them. And so one way this could look is teaching your child to entertain themselves quietly in their room. So providing them appropriate activities that they could do if they do wake up before it's time to actually get out of bed. And this could be reading quietly in their room, playing quietly, listening to soft music, or just doing whatever calming activities you guys have kind of figured out are helpful for them. And then another one that Kaitlyn found was changing or using lighting as a cue. So if they have a hatch machine or any sort of lighting that you can control from your phone, you could put it as a red light for the morning hours. And then when it's time for them to come out of the room and get ready for the day, you could change it to green. So that way it kind of takes away that they have to wait for you to come to them or something. And it gives them more of that independence of like, hey, not yet, and now I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Awesome. And it's awesome that where you're able to use that. That's really cool. So here are just a couple of resources. I feel like we've touched base on Huckleberry already. So Huckleberry has free information. There is also like you can pay a subscription that gives you like more detailed input about sleep, but there's a ton of good free resources from there too. Fun and Function is a website that I use a lot that has a ton of sensory equipment. You can look up, I mean, all sorts of things you could just like dream about. But one thing that I always kind of like to preface is things that are, if they are designed to be like therapeutic, they tend to be more expensive. So you can also find things that do the same thing for cheaper, if that makes sense. If they're not labeled to be like a piece of therapeutic equipment, you can find similar things on like Amazon, Target, Walmart. For example, like Lycra Sentries, those Lycra sheets that I had talked about, you can find those on Amazon for like $20-$30, I think. And so that's usually what I recommend to families is Fun and Function can be a good place to kind of give you ideas about like, hey, what sorts of things could I do? But then also use other resources to maybe find more cost efficient resources. And then also wanted to just include a couple different apps for kiddos that kind of give like meditations and just like mindfulness things, calming stories that can be maybe incorporated. So maybe if you're trying to reduce that screen time, but maybe they want to listen and have that audio, they can have more of a calming guided little like meditation or a little story. And then Canva can be a great resource for just developing bedtime routines, and just kind of making it fun and having pictures. So a couple resources. Questions? Other questions for us? Any comments or anything else you want to add? Okay. Last call. Uh-oh. Yeah. Yeah. That's where I would start. Yep. Yep. Um, yes, because essentially, so from my understanding is that it's something to do with like it could be like their airway could be like partially blocked, could be the reason that they are mouth breathing. And so I mean there's a lot of different factors, but that would be the first step is that I'd be like, hey, this kiddo I notice is like always sleeping with their mouth open. What can we do to kind of further assess that airway? And yeah, because it can really kind of lead to multiple things, not just impacting their sleep, but really their overall health too. Yeah. hmm Anything else? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to like, I'm gonna have to, I'm trying to think of like what seven, it's so that, what? Did we go too fast here? Well, so based on this study, for a kiddo that's 6 to 12 years, they need like 9 to 12 hours of sleep, but that does not include naps. So I would say at that point, if she's still napping, that's maybe telling me something that like she's not getting enough quality sleep at night. And then kind of thinking about why. Like, is she having a hard time falling asleep? Is she not getting that deep, restful sleep? Is she a mouth breather? Is there some of those other things? Is she not getting enough sensory input during the day? So I would say, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily just say like take away the naps right now, but kind of put that investigative hat on and kind of just do a little bit of looking into what does her sleep look like? Is she really restless at night? Is she like tossing and turning? Um, and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. Does she nap like every day? No. Okay. And yeah, and it could be too that she just is maybe another thing too is she there's also that is she just really involved and super active in a ton of things and then she's just like getting herself overtired. So it's also I think it's finding that balance between the things we're doing when we're awake and when we're sleeping, and is it the sleep that's making us have to take a nap, or are we just like doing too much or just emotionally exhausted? I think there's so many things, but yeah, I would just kind of take a like look and see, or is there something happening that day before that's just maybe exhausting her, or is it just building up all week? um but according to this, by this age she should be sleeping about 9 to 12 hours a night, not necessarily having naps. So good question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And it also means that she's listening to her body too. So, I think that's important. If she's recognizing that need for rest, then I mean, I also am an adult and I do sometimes take naps myself as well. I find a good nap. So I think it's recognizing like if it's not happening every day, like she's not coming home from school and needing to take an hour nap every day, maybe it's just truly what her body needs. And maybe she just needs that rest. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, some other areas just to kind of look at to assess like if it is something to be concerned about or not is how is her actual sleep at night? Is that good quality? If it is, great.
Mhm.
And then how is her regulation during the day? Is she pretty cool, calm, and collected, or is she kind of all over the place and overwhelmed and stressed? Just to kind of see those things, and then to kind of be like, okay, is the nap helping or is it not helping?
But sometimes I think sometimes kiddos can use sleep as almost like that response to that like stress, that fight flight response. Then it's almost just like they get to that point where their body's just kind of like, I'm gonna shut down and I'm gonna sleep. So also kind of looking at that too. Yeah. Like are they regulated before it's happening or are they just like super dysregulated? But it sounds to me like she's kind of just like, I need a nap, which is great. So yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Turn the lights on.
Come on. I feel I feel like there's not necessarily a right or wrong. And I think again, that's probably like the response of like the child. Like if the child is that kid that cannot get their butt out of bed in the morning, maybe they need more of that alerting. Like they're gonna need the bright lights. They're gonna maybe need some sound to wake them up. They're gonna need to do some movement versus if they're a kid who's just like, whoa, let's start our day. Like maybe you guys could do some calming activities and that's okay. And they probably won't do the calming activities. They're like, let's go. So no, I think it's just that making sure that then if it's that kiddo that is really waking up and has a lot of energy, then maybe meeting that need and giving them an activity that's kind of getting their body moving and giving them what their body's seeking. So yeah. Great questions. Sleep was, I think we both were like, sleep is a hard topic. Like there's a lot that goes into sleep. So hopefully these were able to help you some, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you guys. Yes.
All right. I don't think we have any more announcements. We're back here next month again. I don't remember our topic right now. Oh, communication, caseworkers, multiple speakers. It sounds awesome. One speaker. Okay. So that'll be a good topic. Keep an eye out for that. And oh yeah, foster parent appreciation. Oh, are our friends, the licensors, coming then? Okay. That's what's going to happen next month. Thank you so much for being here tonight and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you guys. That was awesome.